The storm came faster than anyone had expected. The winds tore across the frozen plains of Tundra 9, carrying sheets of ice and snow that blinded everything in sight. Only the faint glow of the human settlement's emergency lights cut through the white chaos, and even they flickered under the storm's fury. Logan Hayes pulled his hood tighter over his face and adjusted the straps of his thermal backpack. He had crossed this plain many times but never in a storm this fierce. Sensors barely worked in the snow, and the freezing air stung his skin through layers of clothing. Still, he had a job to do. A downed relay tower on the far edge of the zone needed repair before communications with the colony went dark. One more hour in the storm, he thought, and maybe he could make it. As he trudged forward, the wind whipped snow into his eyes, making it nearly impossible to see. Each step felt heavier than the last, the snow hiding rocks and patches of ice that could send him tumbling. Then his thermal scanner picked up something odd. Two faint, irregular heat signals flickered on the small screen. Small. Very small. He frowned, adjusting the scanner. Machines wouldn't have irregular heat patterns like that. Rocks didn't give off heat at all. The signals were warm, weak, alive. Logan froze. He scanned again. The signals weren't moving much. They were too low to be human-sized, too low to be even a large animal. But they were alive. Something small, frozen in the storm, was still breathing. His heart beat faster. He couldn't just leave them out here. Whoever, or whatever, they wouldn't last long. The wind screamed around him as he dug through his pack, pulling out a portable snow shovel. The snow was thick and icy, almost like concrete in his hands. Each scoop was a struggle, and the wind tried to steal it all away. But Logan persisted, following the faint warmth of the signals. After a long minute that felt like an hour, his shovel struck something soft. Carefully, he brushed away more snow, revealing the first of the two small creatures. It was smaller than a human child, with scales pale like frost, almost white, blending perfectly with the snow. Its wings were folded and stiff, and it shivered violently, making no sound but tiny gasps. Logan's breath caught in his throat. Dragons? He whispered to himself, almost not believing it. He had read about them in history logs and old stories, but dragons were rare, nearly extinct, and certainly not seen this close. And albino dragons? He had never imagined it. The second creature lay a few feet away, equally small and fragile, barely moving under the snow. Both were alive but barely. Their breaths were shallow, their tiny bodies trembling uncontrollably. He knew he had only minutes. The storm was worsening, and the hatchlings wouldn't survive another hour out here. Logan set down his shovel and unstrapped his thermal suit. He hesitated. The wind was vicious and the temperature outside was deadly. But the creatures needed warmth. No protocol, no rule, no survival guide told him what to do here. Only one thought filled his mind: save them whatever the cost. He wrapped his suit around the first hatchling, holding it close to his chest. Its tiny body was colder than ice, but slowly he felt warmth returning under his touch. It twitched slightly and opened a pale ice-blue eye. Logan spoke softly, unsure if it could understand but needing to calm it. "It's okay. You're safe now. I won't let you die." The second hatchling shivered violently as he moved closer, wrapping it as well. Both creatures leaned weakly against him, trusting him instinctively, even though he was a stranger. Logan's fingers were numb, his face frozen from the wind, but he refused to let go. He used his body to shield them, his own warmth the only thing keeping them alive. Hours passed in the storm, though it felt like minutes. Every gust of wind made him flinch, but he held them tightly. Occasionally, the creatures made tiny noises, almost like whispers of snow cracking. Logan learned quickly how to adjust their position to keep them breathing. He whispered encouragement, telling them to hold on, even though he wasn't sure if they understood his words. Eventually, he spotted a half-buried maintenance shelter, likely from old mining operations. It wasn't much, but it was something. He dragged himself and the hatchlings inside, shaking snow off their fragile bodies. He activated portable heaters, careful not to scare them with sudden heat. He wrapped them again in spare thermal blankets, making little nests for them to lie in. Logan finally allowed himself a moment to rest, leaning against the wall, exhausted and shaking. The hatchlings' breathing grew steadier. They were surviving. He watched them, fascinated and terrified at the same time. Their eyes, pale and shining in the dim light, followed his every movement. They didn't attack, didn't hiss, didn't roar. They simply watched him with a mix of fear and curiosity. Logan had heard stories of dragons being fierce and dangerous, but these two were helpless, trusting him completely despite their size and strength in adulthood. He realized then that this moment, fragile and quiet, was more dangerous than any storm. Not because of the cold but because one wrong move could kill them, or make them see him as a threat forever. Hours passed though the storm outside raged on. Logan kept speaking softly, keeping them awake and calm, rotating their position against his chest to share warmth. His own skin burned with cold beneath his layers, his muscles aching from holding them so long. Yet he didn't care. He had never done anything like this before, and yet he knew he would do it again. No law, no protocol, no history mattered. Only the lives in his arms mattered. As the storm finally started to wane, Logan looked at the two hatchlings and smiled, though his face was stiff and frozen. "You made it," he whispered, almost disbelieving. "You survived." The creatures blinked, and one of them made a tiny, almost musical chirp. It was a sound that neither human nor dragon should make, and yet it filled the shelter with a strange warmth. Logan realized something then: he had not just saved them. In this storm, in this forgotten corner of the world, he had begun a bond that would change everything. And for the first time in hours he allowed himself to hope. The storm had passed, but the cold lingered like a weight in the air. Logan Hayes sat in the small, half-buried shelter, listening to the soft hiss of the heaters and the occasional tiny chirp of the two albino hatchlings. They lay curled in the thermal blankets, pale wings trembling slightly, but breathing steadily now. Logan's fingers were stiff and numb, and his own body ached from the long hours he had spent keeping them warm. Outside, the wind still moaned across the plains, but inside, there was a fragile silence, like the world had paused for a moment. Logan looked at the hatchlings. One lifted its small head, its ice-blue eyes meeting his. For a moment they seemed to understand each other. Neither spoke, neither roared, yet something passed between them. It was trust, raw and unspoken. He had saved them, yes, but he realized that saving them would be only the first step. What would happen when the larger dragons came? The adults of this world were not kind to humans. And humans were not kind to dragons either. He thought about leaving. He could take his scanner, mark the location, and leave them in the shelter. Someone else would find them, maybe the authorities or the dragon patrols. That would be the safe choice, the one that kept him alive. But the thought of leaving them alone made his stomach twist. Alone they would die, frozen and weak. No one else could reach them in time. He could not turn away. Logan made his decision. He would stay. Whatever came, he would stay and protect them. He adjusted the blankets, gently wrapping the first hatchling closer to his chest. Its wings fluttered slightly against him, shivering, and it let out a tiny squeak. Logan whispered softly, "I've got you. You don't have to fight. You don't have to do anything. Just stay warm." Then he picked up the second hatchling and held it carefully, pressing it against his side. Both creatures clung weakly to him, trusting his warmth. Hours passed slowly. Logan kept speaking to them in soft tones, repeating simple words, telling them to breathe, to relax, to survive. He rubbed their tiny bodies gently with his hands, careful not to hurt their fragile scales. Each time one of them trembled, he adjusted its position, pressed it closer, shared his own heat. His skin burned with cold beneath layers of clothing, but he ignored it. He had eaten nothing since morning, drank nothing, and yet he did not notice. His mind was entirely on keeping them alive. At one point, the hatchlings began to stir, testing their strength. The first one lifted its tiny head and chirped, a sound almost like a musical note. Logan smiled despite the cold and exhaustion. "Good job," he said softly. "You're doing fine. Keep going." The second hatchling nudged its sibling gently, a tiny nudge of comfort, and Logan realized they were already beginning to care for each other. They had survived this far together, and now he was their third member, the one they could rely on. The wind outside grew sharper again, rattling the metal of the shelter. Logan tightened the blankets around them, forming little nests of warmth. He wrapped his own arms around both, sharing his heat as much as he could. The night was long. Every sound outside, the creak of ice, the howl of wind, the snap of frozen rocks, made him tense, but the hatchlings did not panic. They seemed to know somehow that he would not abandon them. As the night deepened, Logan thought about the future. What would happen when the adult dragons came? Would they attack him? Would they take the hatchlings by force? He had no idea. But one thought comforted him. These two creatures would survive because of him. He had chosen them over safety, over rules, over himself. And for the first time in his life, Logan felt something strong and true. Responsibility not as a burden but as a choice. He remembered stories of dragons being fierce, cruel, unstoppable, and feared by entire colonies. But these hatchlings, small and helpless, trusted him already. Their trust was not earned by power or threats. It was given freely because he had chosen to care. Logan realized then that power was not always strength. Sometimes, the strongest thing a being could do was to choose to protect another, without expecting anything in return. Morning finally came. The first weak rays of light filtered through cracks in the shelter walls. The storm had passed completely, leaving the world outside glistening with frost and ice. Logan gently adjusted the blankets, letting the hatchlings stretch slightly. They moved slowly, testing their wings but did not fly. Logan smiled. "We made it," he said, though he was more tired than he had ever been in his life. "You're alive. And we're going to keep it that way." Then a low rumble shook the ground outside. Logan froze. He could hear massive footsteps crunching through the snow, a sound that did not belong to any human. His heart pounded. Adult dragons. He knew instantly. The hatchlings stirred, pressing close to him instinctively. He felt their tiny bodies tremble and he held them tighter. The sound grew louder. Shadows moved across the frost outside. Logan realized that the moment of decision had come again. Would they attack him? Or would they understand what he had done? Logan did not know. All he knew was that he could not leave the hatchlings now. Whatever came, he would stay. He would protect them. He had already chosen this path and there was no turning back. He spoke softly to the hatchlings, though the dragons outside could hear nothing of his words. "Stay close. I won't let anything happen to you." The rumbling stopped suddenly. A massive shadow passed the entrance of the shelter, but no claw or jaw came inside. The hatchlings made small chirps, curious but cautious. Logan realized something impossible. The adult dragons were not attacking. They were observing. They had felt his warmth. They had seen his care. And somehow they understood. Logan exhaled slowly, still holding the two hatchlings close. The choice he had made, the one no species expected, had changed everything. In that moment he realized that being human did not mean weakness. Being human meant making choices that others would never understand. And sometimes those choices could create bonds stronger than fear or power. The storm was over. The hatchlings were alive. And Logan Hayes, alone in a frozen shelter, had just shown a kind of courage that even dragons could recognize. The cold morning light filtered through the cracked walls of the shelter, casting pale beams across the snow that still covered the frozen plains. Logan Hayes shifted slightly, careful not to disturb the two albino hatchlings nestled against him. Their small bodies had warmed enough to stop shivering violently, but they were still weak, still fragile, still dependent on him. He had stayed awake all night, rotating them between his chest and arms, whispering softly to calm their panic and keep their hearts steady. Now finally he allowed himself to take a deep breath and rub his frozen hands together. He had just begun to hope that they might survive completely on their own when the ground trembled beneath him. At first he thought it was just the frost cracking, but the tremor grew stronger, rhythmic, deliberate. Logan's chest tightened. He recognized the sound immediately, a deep vibration that ran through the ice and snow. Dragons. Adult dragons. He had known they would return eventually. He had prepared for the worst. Outside, the shadows of massive wings spread across the snow. The two hatchlings stirred at once, pressing close to him instinctively. Their wings trembled in fear, tiny claws digging into the blankets. Logan whispered, "It's okay. I won't let them hurt you. Just stay calm." He did not know if the hatchlings understood the words, but the tone was enough to calm them slightly. Then he saw them clearly. 3 enormous albino dragons landed just outside the shelter. Their scales shimmered in the pale morning light, gleaming like polished ice. Their eyes glowed faintly, observing, calculating. Logan's heart pounded, but he stayed still, keeping the hatchlings close. He could feel their tiny bodies shaking against him and he tightened his grip. Logan expected attack, expected fire, expected rage. But nothing came. The dragons did not roar. They did not charge. They simply stood, watching, wings folded and massive heads tilted as if they were trying to understand what had happened. Logan realized that their eyes were not full of anger. They were curious, confused, almost respectful. He had done what no one else dared. He had stayed with the hatchlings all night, shared his warmth, ignored the storm, and risked his life for creatures that could have easily destroyed him. And now the adult dragons seemed to sense it. They understood, in a way that went beyond words or gestures, that Logan had chosen care over fear, life over safety. One of the dragons stepped closer, nostrils flaring, its massive head lowering toward the shelter entrance. Logan froze, holding the hatchlings tighter. The dragon's eyes scanned him, then the hatchlings. Its gaze lingered on Logan's hands, still raw from holding them, and the blankets wrapped carefully around their tiny bodies. It was studying him not as prey, not as a threat, but as a protector. The hatchlings made small chirps, almost musical notes, and the adult dragons responded with low, resonant hums. Logan realized then that this was not a moment of danger. It was a moment of recognition. The dragons had returned not to punish but to witness. Time seemed to slow. Logan's body ached, his fingers numb, his face frozen from the cold. And yet he felt a strange calm. He did not know why, but he sensed that this moment would change everything. The adult dragons were immense, terrifying to anyone else, but they were silent, watching the fragile life in his arms and acknowledging his courage. One of the hatchlings lifted its tiny head and chirped at the approaching dragon. The adult lowered its massive jaw almost gently to meet the hatchling's eyes. Logan held his breath. Then, unexpectedly, the dragon's enormous wings shifted, brushing the snow, creating a small circle of warmth around them. It was a gesture he could barely comprehend, but it meant something. Acceptance. Safety. Permission. Logan exhaled slowly, trying not to move too much. He felt the hatchlings relax against him. Their tiny wings stopped trembling, and their eyes blinked slowly, trustfully. The storm outside was over, but a different storm had passed inside him. A storm of fear, doubt, and exhaustion. Now it was replaced with something heavier but stronger: hope. The adult dragons did not stay long. They moved in measured steps, circling the shelter, making sure the hatchlings were safe, and then without a sound they took to the sky. Logan watched as the enormous creatures lifted off, wings powerful, slicing through the frozen air, carrying the faint warmth of approval with them. The hatchlings chirped and flapped, watching their kin disappear into the clouds. Logan stroked their tiny heads gently. "They know you're safe," he whispered. "They know I won't let anything happen to you." For the first time in hours, Logan felt a small relief wash over him. The danger had passed, and yet he realized the story was only beginning. The hatchlings were alive, yes, but they had witnessed something extraordinary. A human who had chosen care over fear. That choice, quiet and unseen by the world, had earned their trust. And perhaps, someday it would change the way humans and dragons saw each other. Logan moved to gather supplies, preparing to leave the shelter and get the hatchlings somewhere safe. But he paused when he noticed a faint marking on the snow near the shelter's entrance. It was small, almost invisible but unmistakable, a symbol of protection left by one of the adult dragons. Logan had no idea what it meant exactly, but instinctively he understood. They were not done observing him. He had been marked as someone who cared, someone worthy of trust, someone who could survive the harshest cold and still choose life over fear. The hatchling stirred again, looking up at him with bright eyes, chirping softly. Logan smiled, despite the fatigue and frostbite creeping into his fingers. "Come on," he said, scooping them gently into his arms again. "Let's get out of this shelter. You've survived the storm. Now we'll survive everything else too." As they left the small structure and stepped into the wide, frozen plains, Logan felt a strange weight lift from his shoulders. He had faced the storm, faced the night, and faced the dragons themselves. And in return he had earned something extraordinary: respect, recognition, and the beginning of a bond that might one day change the balance between species on this icy world. The morning sun sparkled on the snow, and for the first time in his life, Logan Hayes felt that survival was not just about fighting the storm. It was about choosing to protect what mattered even when no one else expected it. Years passed. The two albino hatchlings, now young dragons, had grown taller, stronger, and more graceful than anyone had expected. Their wings stretched wide, shimmering in the sunlight, and their pale scales reflected the ice-blue light of Tundra 9. They were fast, powerful, and clever. Yet beneath their strength they carried memories that no lesson could erase. Memories of cold. Memories of fear. And memories of the human who had saved their lives when no one else would. Their names were Kale and Leora. Kale was slightly larger, with sharper claws and a playful curiosity that often got him into trouble. Leora was smaller, cautious, and thoughtful, always observing before acting. Despite their differences, they shared a bond deeper than most dragon siblings. And both remembered Logan Hayes, the human who had risked everything to protect them in the storm. They had been taught the history of dragons, of humans, of wars and conflicts. They had been trained in flight, hunting, and survival. They had learned to trust their instincts, to avoid humans when necessary, and to respect the power that came with their wings. Yet, whenever they thought of Logan, every lesson faded. He had shown them something no teacher, no story, and no parent could teach: kindness without expectation. A choice to protect even when it meant danger. Kale and Leora often flew over the frozen plains where they had been found, remembering the blizzard that had almost taken their lives. They would land at the same shelter, now abandoned and half buried in ice, and hover silently. Kale would let out a small chirp, a sound only Leora could understand, and she would respond with a gentle hum. The memories of Logan's warmth, his careful hands and his whispered words were vivid, almost as if they had been burned into their minds. One day the two dragons returned to the human colony where Logan had worked. They landed on a hill outside the settlement, wings folding carefully to avoid scaring the humans. From a distance they watched the humans move about, carrying tools, speaking and laughing. Kale tilted his head, eyes scanning the colony. He remembered the fear, the helplessness, and then the sudden safety that Logan had given them. It was strange to think that humans, who were often cautious or aggressive toward dragons, could also be capable of such selfless care. Leora spoke softly to Kale in their melodic dragon language. "Do you think he remembers us?" Kale's eyes focused on the distant figure of a man working near the edge of the settlement. He shook his head slowly. "I don't know. Maybe. But it doesn't matter. He taught us something that will last longer than memory. It is not about being feared or being strong. It is about choice." The two dragons had grown wise beyond their years. In the skies above Tundra 9, they had seen humans destroy, humans build, humans fight, and humans care. They had observed the way Logan acted that stormy night, and it became their measure of all humans. The ones who chose kindness were rare, but powerful in a way that claws and fire could never match. One afternoon the colony faced a problem. A sudden blizzard trapped a group of settlers far from the base. The humans struggled to survive against the cold, and their technology could only do so much. The dragons could have ignored the humans, flown away, or even scolded them for entering the frozen plains. But Kale and Leora remembered Logan. They remembered the warmth, the protection, the choice to act when it was easiest to run. Without hesitation, Kale and Leora took to the skies. Their wings cut through the snow, powerful and precise. They located the trapped humans and used their bodies to shield them from the harsh wind. They created safe paths across icy ridges and guided the settlers back to the colony. Each action was careful, each movement deliberate, echoing the lessons they had learned from Logan. The humans were terrified at first, but as Kale and Leora led them safely to warmth, they realized the dragons were not hostile. They were protectors just as Logan had been to them years ago. Back in the sky, the dragons perched on a high ridge, looking down at the humans safe inside the settlement. Leora spoke to Kale softly. "This is what he wanted. He showed us the meaning of choice. We protect those who cannot protect themselves not because we must but because we can." Kale nodded. "And the humans will learn, someday. They will remember that not all dragons are threats. Some can teach them courage, trust and care. Just as he taught us." That night, Kale and Leora curled on the icy ridge, wings wrapping around each other for warmth. They thought of Logan Hayes again, the man who had made their lives possible. They remembered the freezing storm, the long night in the shelter, and the way he had chosen them over his own safety. No history book could capture that. No dragon lesson could explain it. It was a memory of the heart, simple and powerful, that guided every choice they made from that moment forward. As they gazed at the stars above Tundra 9, Kale whispered, "We will never forget. Humans are stronger than we imagined, not in power but in what they can choose to do." Leora nodded, eyes reflecting the starlight. "And we will carry that memory with us always. It will guide our actions, protect our choices and shape our world." The storm that had nearly taken their lives was long gone, but its lesson lived on. The two dragons, now young and strong, understood something that no history book had ever taught them. The world was not changed by fear or power or anger. It was changed by a single act of care, by a choice made in the cold, by a human who had seen two fragile lives and decided they were worth saving. Kale and Leora would carry that lesson into every wind, every sky, and every challenge. And when the time came they would teach it again, not with words but with action, just as Logan had taught them long ago. Years passed quietly, and Logan Hayes returned to his ordinary life. The memory of the blizzard and the two fragile albino hatchlings never left him, but he did not speak of it much. To most, he was just another human worker on Tundra 9, someone who repaired machines, checked sensors, and walked the frozen plains. He did not expect recognition, glory, or thanks. He had done what he could, simply because it was the right thing to do. Meanwhile, Kale and Leora had grown into dragons of remarkable skill and grace. Their scales glimmered like snow and ice, and their wings cut through the cold air with power and precision. They traveled the skies freely, exploring mountains, frozen rivers, and valleys no human had ever seen. Yet, no matter where they went or what they experienced, they carried a memory of one human, one night, one choice that had saved their lives. The bond they had with Logan was invisible but powerful. The world of dragons was harsh. Survival often demanded strength, dominance, and caution. But Kale and Leora had learned a lesson no one else could teach, that courage could take many forms, and sometimes the strongest act was not fighting but choosing to protect. Logan's choice had quietly shaped them, and in return they made their own choices guided by that lesson. One day the human colony faced a new challenge. A sudden ice quake had blocked the main supply route, leaving a group of settlers trapped with limited food and no shelter. Panic spread through the colony, and the human rescue teams were overwhelmed. Logan, now in his mid-30s, was called to help, mostly to repair sensors and relay communications. He had no idea that the dragons he had saved would soon play a role in the events unfolding. High above the colony, Kale and Leora watched. They recognized the danger immediately. The humans below were struggling against the ice, much like Logan had struggled against the blizzard years ago. Without a moment's hesitation, the dragons swooped down, powerful wings cutting through the frigid air. They guided the humans, clearing snowdrifts and pointing out safe paths with gentle nudges and careful flaps of their wings. It was not force or fear that led the humans, it was guidance, just as Logan had guided them all those years ago. Logan watched from a ridge, stunned. He had never seen dragons act like this before. They were not attacking. They were not demanding tribute or warning of danger. They were protecting. His mind raced as he realized that the dragons he had saved had returned, not for revenge or curiosity, but to repay the kindness he had once shown. And somehow he understood that they did not see it as repayment, it was simply the right thing to do. After the ice quake, the colony was safe, and the settlers returned to warmth and food. Logan finally approached the dragons, cautious, aware of their power. Kale and Leora lowered their heads, eyes bright, almost smiling. Logan reached out a hand, trembling slightly. The dragons pressed their heads gently against his palms. It was a silent acknowledgement, a connection that needed no words. Logan's heart swelled with an emotion he had never felt before. Pride? Gratitude? Perhaps both, but more than that, it was a quiet understanding. The choice he had made years ago had shaped more than two lives. It had started a chain of events that bridged two species. One small decision, made in the cold and fear, had become something larger than he could have imagined. Over the following years, the bond between humans and dragons grew. Colonies began to work with dragons instead of fearing them. Rescue missions, patrols, and exploration teams included both species. They learned from each other. Humans learned to act with courage and kindness, and dragons learned that not all humans were threats. And all of it could trace back to one night, one storm, and one man who chose warmth over safety. Historians would later write about the change not as a sudden event or a battle, but as a quiet turning point. They would say that Tundra 9 had changed because of a single act of courage that no one expected. Kale and Leora became symbols of that change, and Logan Hayes became a figure spoken of quietly among the colony, not in stories of heroism, but in stories of choice, responsibility, and care. One winter evening, Logan stood on a ridge looking out over the plains. Kale and Leora circled above him, wings glinting in the sunset. Logan smiled, feeling the wind brush past his face. He did not speak. He did not need to. The dragons knew. The humans knew. And most importantly, the memory of that storm, of two fragile hatchlings, and of a man who chose to stay would live on forever. Logan thought of the long, cold night when he had held the hatchlings against his chest, listening to their tiny breaths and whispering to them to survive. He remembered the warmth that had passed between them, small but powerful. That night had been dangerous, exhausting, and terrifying. And yet it had been worth every second. Because one choice, made quietly and without expectation, had changed everything. Kale and Leora finally landed beside him. Logan knelt, letting the dragons press their foreheads against his shoulders. The moment was peaceful, filled with understanding that did not need words. Logan knew, as he always had, that life was measured not by the storms we survive, but by the choices we make in them. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the frozen plains, Logan Hayes realized that he had witnessed the quietest, strongest kind of legacy. One that could not be recorded in books, painted on walls, or spoken aloud. It lived in memory, in trust, in action. It lived in Kale and Leora. It lived in every human and dragon who would come to know the story, even without knowing his name. Because some decisions, small and simple, were more powerful than anything else in the universe.